Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Strategies to Implement and Future-Proof Organisations Against Cybersecurity Threats. This webinar is brought to you by Greenship Technology and Shipping 2030. My name is Sita Kelsey and I will be your moderator today. In a moment, I will be turning things over to our speaker, but first let me explain how you can get the most out of this event. To improve your viewing and listening experience, you can move your webcast windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize them by clicking on the lower right corner. At the bottom of the screen, you'll find multiple application widgets. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the green resource list widget. We welcome questions about our topic and will answer as many as we can following the presentation, but feel free to submit yours to the queue at any time. Just type it into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen and hit the submit button. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. So now let me introduce today's presenter. We have Chronis Kapalidis, who is a fellow as part of the International Security Department at Chatham House. You can find out more about information about our speakers by clicking on the speaker bio widget at the bottom of your screen. With that, let's get started. Chronis, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Sita, and hello everyone, and thank you so much for attending the webinar. As you can see from the slide, there are two objectives for this webinar. Initially, our intention is to present the current landscape for the shipping industry in the cyber realm. But the main objective is to emphasize the value of adopting a risk-based cyber strategy by illustrating the importance of developing effective contingency plans in retrospect. But before we begin, let me just answer this important question. Well, the answer, as you can see from the various examples included in the table on your left, is obvious. The maritime industry, whether targeted per se or falling victim of cyber attacks in different domains, more or less suffering from collateral damage, is actually vulnerable. I will only focus on the first and the last examples to offer some insights. Back in 2010, one of the major Greek shipping companies was targeted by the piracy network, and what the pirates did was pay hackers in order to manage to gain access to the shipping company's data. The hackers were able to gain access through Wi-Fi light bulbs that the company had installed and never bothered to change the password. Only last month, two major ports in Europe and the US, the Port of Barcelona and Port of San Diego, both suffered from cyber breaches. Actually, by the 15th of October, San Diego was still struggling to recover from that. So you can understand that this is something that has been going on for years and will continue to affect the industry in various aspects. Hence, during this webinar, we will look briefly at the following. The landscape, the threat landscape, where we will examine current threats and threat actors and their motivations. We will try and illustrate the way stakeholders within the industry understand cybersecurity, and then focus on the methods of implementing effective cyber risk management and business continuity planning. Hence, cybersecurity may be described as the definition in your screen. What is important to understand, which is described in the illustrated definition as well, is that cybersecurity requires a holistic approach. Achieving effective security at the cyberspace requires initially for targeted policies to be adopted, which will later be interpreted into actions that will utilize existing cutting-edge technologies to protect the organization's cyber environment. But which are the existing threats that cybersecurity in general is seeking to address? In order to answer that question, we will look first at the type of cyber attacks, along with the threat actors and their objectives and motivators. There are two main categories of cyber attacks targeting the maritime industry. They are distinguished as to whether they are actually targeted or not. Untargeted attacks can be described as those where a company or ship systems and data are one of many potential targets. Untargeted attacks are likely to use tools and techniques available on the internet, which can be used to locate known vulnerabilities in a company and on board the ship. The most common of those are malware, which is a software designed to access or damage a computer without the knowledge of the owner. There are various types of malware, including Trojans, spyware, and others, but what they try to do is exploit known deficiencies and problems in outdated or unpatched business software. Social engineering, which is a non-technical technique used by potential cyber attackers to manipulate individuals working within the targeted organization into breaking security procedures, normally but not exclusively through the interaction via social media. The most popular method of achieving this is by what is known as phishing, and you can see a phishing email illustrated here on the slide. It entails sending emails to a large number of potential targets asking for particular pieces of sensitive or confidential information. Such an email may also request that an individual visits a fake website or use a hyperlink included in the email. Waterholing, which includes establishing a fake website or compromising a genuine website in order to exploit visitors. Ransomware, which is very widely used as well, which is a different way of malware that encrypts data on systems until such time as the distributor decrypts the information. A recent maritime-related ransomware attack was the one that affected Maersk back in June 2017, known as the MITIGATION ransomware. Targeted attacks, on the other hand, may be more sophisticated and use tools and techniques specifically created for targeting a particular company or a ship. Examples of tools and techniques which may be used in these circumstances include brute force, which is an attack trying many passwords with the hope of eventually guessing correctly. Spear phishing, an example of which you can see on this specific slide, which is similar to phishing, but the individuals are targeted with personal emails, often containing malicious software or links that automatically download malicious software. And in December 2017, such an attack was probably conducted to one of the world's biggest sea brokers, Clarkson. Also, deploying botnets, which are remotely controlled personal computers used to deliver distributed denial of service attacks. And finally, attacks that aim to subvert the supply chain by attacking a company or a ship by compromising equipment of software being delivered to the company or the ship itself. Regarding the actors that use the cyber environment, looking specifically at the categories of actors that may use the cyber environment to achieve their goals, and more focusing on the shipping industry, research has indicated that organized criminals are the predominant actors that are targeting the industry. So what are actually the effects that these actors are trying to achieve in general? Getting through cybersecurity defenses, threat actors aim to achieve various goals which could be broadly categorized in these four main categories. So initially, they try to extract data or publish this sensitive data, or sell it and use ransomware to gain money. Also focus on financial gain by using financial fraud techniques. And finally, disrupt economies and critical national infrastructures of other states. As indicated in the UK Department for Transport Code of Practice, the motivation for the aforementioned actors to conduct a cyber attack for a ship specifically may be one of the following 6 purposes. Initially, cyber misuse, which includes low-level criminal activities, including vandalism and disruption of systems, and unauthorized access to the systems. The acts may be perpetrated by script kiddies or through insider activity by unsatisfied personnel and contractors. Secondly, activist groups like hacktivists. They seek publicity or create pressure on behalf of a specific object or cause in order to prevent the handling of specific cargoes for the industry or to disrupt the operation of the ship. They may target the ship itself, the operator of the ship, or a third party, such as the supplier or the recipient of the cargo. Corporate espionage, seeking unauthorized access to sensitive information like intellectual property, commercial information, corporate strategies, and others, and also, in general, try to achieve disruption for state or commercial purposes. organized criminals, as we previously mentioned, largely driven by financial gain, which may include criminal damage, theft of cargo or smuggling of goods and people, and even seeking to evade taxes in specific cases. Terrorism, aiming to manipulate the ship to instilling fear and cause physical and economic disruption. And finally, warfare, targeting to create conflict between nation states, where the aim is the disruption of transship systems and infrastructure to deny operational use or disable specific ships, such as oil tankers. In this context, it should be argued that the ship's cyber environment is composed of interconnected networks of both information technology, operational technology, and cyber-physical systems utilizing electronic computer-based and wireless systems, including the information services, social and business functions that exist only in cyberspace. On a ship, the computer-based systems will comprise a range of information technology components and operational technology, as we will see in the following slide. So looking specifically which are the systems that may be vulnerable on board the ship, we realize that they do not actually have to be connected to the internet per se. All systems on board the ship that have some sort of software embedded in them can potentially be affected by malware. These, as illustrated here, vary from cargo management and navigation systems to passenger and crew welfare systems, encompassing the whole spectrum of shipping, from commercial to cruise liners. So the research that we conduct here at Chatham House regarding the level of awareness within the industry has illustrated that there is actually a large gap of awareness within the industry. The positive perspective is that over the last year, the urgency for action is becoming gradually understood. But why is it that the shipping industry is slowly coming to grips with this new threat? Well, there are three factors for that. First of all, there is no apparent ship-related cyber attacks. There is no 9/11 per se for the shipping industry. So the ship owners feel that they're not targeted. Secondly, there is no mandatory framework apart from the IMO regulation that we will see in the next slide that come into force in 2021. Having said that, there are other regulations affecting maritime stakeholders which have a cyber component, like the GDPR or the NIST framework. And finally, there are other mandatory actions that need to be applied, like the ballast water management system in 2019 and the sulfur cap in 2020. So they are the priority for the shipping industry. But why cyber is important? Well, as you can see from these three graphs, which are part of the crew connectivity report that came out in spring this year, 3 out of 4 people asked whether they care about crew connectivity said that this is very important, and the level of influence is very strong for 2 out of 3. So people select where they will work based on crew connectivity and internet access on board the ships. The second one, and if you combine these two, illustrate that over the last 3 years, the level of connectivity on board different categories of vessels has doubled or tripled in some cases. But the misunderstanding and the problem comes when you look at the third graph, which says when these people are asked which is responsible for cybersecurity, only 20% says that everyone is responsible, with the rest implying that it's mainly the master's responsibility or the company's or someone else's apart from them. So in June 2017, IMO issued the draft guidelines on maritime cyber risk management. What they illustrate is that the organization should follow a risk-based approach that will enable it to best apply its resources in the most effective manner. But what are these risks that may originate from cyber breach? Well, they include unauthorized access to sensitive ship data, like commercial, personal, or security-related data, theft of sensitive ship data, deletion, unauthorized modification or corruption of this ship data, infection with malware, loss of services from systems due to loss of connectivity or power, loss of service for these systems due to software or hardware failures, and finally, compromise of ship security systems. But the problem comes in when we try to model cyber risk, and this is difficult mainly for three reasons. First of all, regarding cyber risk in the shipping sector, there's no authoritative source of data. It's difficult to gain access to data in order to be able and comprehend what the risks are and what are the vulnerabilities. Secondly, a cyber risk model requires the input not only from technology, but from people and processes. All of these need to be incorporated in order to come up with a concrete cyber risk model for the shipping industry. And finally, there are limited risk quantification models out there in the industry. What is suggested from our perspective is that companies should try and follow a cybersecurity capability maturity model, which is the one illustrated in the screen, drawn from the US Homeland Security paper and also the Oxford Cybersecurity Capability Center paper that you can see at the bottom, where it can easily be graphed what are the vulnerabilities and how a company should approach the concept of cyber risk. So, having looked at the challenges around defining and managing risk, it is time to present different approaches to holistic cybersecurity strategies that should be adopted by shipping companies. Initially, BIMCO's guidelines, which have now reached its second version, have come up with the following approach on cybersecurity awareness, which actually is not only about awareness, but can easily be applied to corporate level cybersecurity strategy. Hence, this approach should adopt the following steps. Initially, it should identify the specific threats more relevant to our organization, both external and internal, posed by misuse of installed networks and lack of awareness, as we previously mentioned. Secondly, we have to identify the vulnerabilities of all assets within our organization. We should record all connected onboard systems, understand the consequences of breaching the security of these systems, and identify the limitations of existing protective measures. Thirdly, following a risk management analysis, we must determine the possibility of these systems being targeted by external and internal actors based on the risks that we previously identified. The next step would be to develop a risk mitigation policy and specific measures that will reduce the likelihood of these vulnerabilities and also reduce the potential impact that an attack may have on a specific vulnerability of these ships and these systems. What should be understood is that right now we are discussing not if an attack will occur to us, to our organization, but when it will occur. So this conceptualization leads us to the next step, which is the development of contingency plans to tackle all effects of potential attacks to the safety and security of our ship specifically. Finally, in the event of such an attack occurring, having applied the already developed contingency plan, the relevant staff should aim to recover normal operations as soon as possible and assess the effectiveness of the aforementioned plans in order to further amend and update. Maersk, for example, came out after the attack and said that they were able to recover within 2 weeks, giving specific details of the approach that they took on that. Also, the NIST cybersecurity framework, originated from the US, gives us a similar guideline as to how we can protect and frame our cybersecurity strategy. It starts with identifying our asset management, business environment, and governance, and also looking at risk assessment and risk management strategy. Then we have to protect our access control, focus on awareness training, data security, information protection procedures and procedures, maintenance, and protective technology. Then we should have the ability to detect any anomalies and events, also build our security and continuous monitoring and detection processes. When the event occurs, we should be ready to respond by using our response planning, communications analysis, and mitigation and improvement methods. And finally, we have to recover using the recovery planning, improvements, and communications. You can see that more or less these guidelines follow the same principles, and this is the concept that the companies should adopt, whether adopting one or the other to follow. What we suggest from our research is that every policy, strategy, and measures to be implemented should be targeting at these three main pillars, as we previously mentioned in the risk model. The policy should aim at tackling the human factor vulnerability, protect the infrastructure, specifically talking about the ship's onboard systems, as well as the company's software and hardware, and finally, aim to keep a consistent attitude towards establishment processes, building all in all what we call a cyber culture. The industry has focused in the past into building a safety culture and a security culture. So it is time to move towards a new cyber culture. The purpose of performing this cybersecurity assessment is to adopt a risk management approach to assessing and mitigating the risks associated with the threat actors that are relevant to the ship or ships that are being assessed. The benefits of adopting this approach is that the cybersecurity risks may be prioritized, enabling appropriate and proportionate investment to be made in a portfolio of security controls to mitigate those risks with potentially the greatest impact. Ship security assessments are conducted in compliance with the ship security standards and could be designated as being complementary to the ship security assessment and may be added there as an annex. The purpose of these assessments is principally to identify vulnerabilities in physical and personal security measures and the company's or ship's business processes that may lead to a cyber incident. It is intended that whenever appropriate and wherever appropriate, the cybersecurity assessment should build upon the existing security assessments. It shouldn't be something new that will be introduced, but it should be something that will update and complement the existing ship security assessment. This graph by the UK Department for Transport Code of Practice aptly illustrates the aforementioned analysis. As with the ship security assessment that we previously mentioned, the cybersecurity assessment should be periodically reviewed and updated, taking into account the following: the changes in previously identified risks, new threats and vulnerabilities that may come up, changes to the ship or the purpose of its use, the successful implementation of security controls, and also new and potentially more effective security controls that may be introduced, drawing from the experience of other sectors. The company should establish a suitable mechanisms for performing ad hoc risk reviews to identify and assess the impact of any changes on the ship that should be reflected in this cybersecurity assessment. The triggers for initiating such a review and the timetable for its implementation should be set out within the cybersecurity plan that should also be implemented. This risk assessment should consider the nature of harm that may be caused, which may be to the ship, to seaboard personnel, to passengers, to other assets and personnel, and or even the benefits the ship exists to deliver, and which could be societal, environmental, or commercial. The cybersecurity risk will depend on the likelihood that a threat actor can exploit one or more vulnerabilities and cause the nature of harm identified. So, this wraps up this presentation, and I believe we were able to meet the objectives as they were set at the beginning, which were to deliver an overall presentation of the existing trends and threats and illustrate them, those that are posed within the maritime industry. And finally, to emphasize and focus and highlight the importance of a risk-based approach when dealing with cybersecurity and how this should be implemented in company strategies and how we can appreciate the value of business continuity planning. Thank you so much for your attention.
All right. Well, Chronis, thank you so much for that in-depth, insightful presentation. We've had a couple of questions come in during the broadcast, which I would like to now ask Chronis, if that's okay. The first one I've got here for you is from the examples that I think you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. You know, big corporates like Maersk, Costco Shipping Lines, Clarksons. The question is, how can smaller to mid-sized companies learn from these attacks on the larger corporates and apply the risk mitigation strategies that you mentioned effectively, but you know, with smaller budgets? So essentially, how can smaller companies still apply the same practices as larger companies?
Thank you so much for your question, and thank to our participants for asking it. Well, this is a tricky question, to tell you the truth, because when you try to invest in cybersecurity measures, you need to spend a large budget in order to do that. But what we have understood from the attacks that you mentioned is that even large corporations, large organizations like Maersk and Costco, suffered from such attacks. So we go back to my previous comment that it's not a matter of if we will be attacked, but when we will be attacked. So small companies should, of course, focus on the three pillars that I mentioned: the human factor, the infrastructure, and the processes, and they should try it and develop a tailored strategy for them specifically that will, of course, minimize the risk by following a risk-based analysis. But what they should primarily do is focus on how they can recover from such an attack. And to tell you the truth, that is not really so costly. So they can work on how they will have effective backups, what are the contingency plans that can be in place, and how their people will be in a position to use these contingency plans and these emergency procedures in order to minimize the cost and to minimize the disruption to their business and to their everyday operations. So it's not a matter only of costing, but it's a matter of planning and being reactive and being proactive instead of being reactive when it comes to cyber.
Okay. The next question we've got here, in your opinion, Chronis, what is the single largest cyber threat that is facing the shipping industry in the next 12 months or so?
Well, again, I would say that practice has shown that currently organized criminals are the ones that are targeting the shipping industry. But to go back to the findings of the research that we conduct here at Chatham House, the main problem is raising awareness and trying to get the message to the boardroom suite and let senior managers understand that cybersecurity is an issue and the company should invest time and budget in order to minimize and mitigate that risk. But talking specifically about threats that can target the industry, I would have to say that, again, the financial gain and the motivation behind gaining money from an industry that is engaged with a lot of third-party vendors and a lot of financial transactions are conducted daily, this will still remain the predominant threat for the industry, not only for the next 12 months, but for the foreseeable future from what we can see so far. That being said, doesn't mean that we should not focus and we should not be prepared on the other types of attacks and the other type of actors that we have illustrated in this webinar. But for now, and from what we understand when talking to relevant stakeholders, the predominant threat is financial loss.
I suppose it comes down to that age-old mantra of if you fail to plan, plan to fail. So I think that kind of aptly summarizes what you're saying there. Last question I've got for you, Chronis. What are the top 2 factors that you would identify as operational vulnerabilities on board a vessel?
Well, talking specifically about vessels, it is very frustrating, to tell you the truth, because when I have been talking with ship owners and relevant stakeholders, all of them believe that their ships are protected because they're not connected to the internet. But we have discussed here briefly that any system, whether connected or not to the internet, may be jeopardized from a single USB that one of the crew members may carry with him that has any sort of malware that may affect the safety systems on board the ship. So predominantly, the two main areas that we should focus on regarding operational technology and the operation of the ship is, of course, its navigation for safety reasons. And the biggest vulnerability there, of course, as it has been highlighted in several discussions and forums, is the updates of the EGDIS system, the electronic chart display and information system on board ships, which is used as a primary means of navigation. These updates usually come through a USB stick or through a download link that is sent to the ship. So if we carelessly click on any link or use any USB without talking to our company first or without taking the necessary mitigation measures, then our navigation, our primary means of navigation may be jeopardized, and we may be left standing in the middle of nowhere without any maps. I know this may be a bit dramatic, but this is actually the truth, and examples have been, and experiments have been run in order to illustrate that vulnerability. The second biggest vulnerability, of course, is the requirement, as we have seen from the report, the requirement of crew to have internet access while on board. And even though most shipping companies are trying to separate the networks that are used for business purposes and for crew entertainment, it all comes down to one specific equipment that is used on board ships. And this equipment is the one that has the link with the satellite. I know this may be a bit technical, but it's important to understand that the ships have one dedicated system to have access to the internet, and after the internet arrives at the ship, then it is segmented into two different networks. But these networks are connected in their source. So any links or any malicious software that is downloaded accidentally by the crew, then this may end up to the business network and may affect the whole operation of the ship. So there are two different aspects there and two different threats, but they are equally important and may affect the operation of the ship in a large scale.
Okay, well, I know that we've had a few more questions. I think we've run out of time, but just a reminder, any questions that do come in, Chronis will be following up with them, and you'll be able to download the answers to those. Chronis, thank you so much for your time. Really, really insightful, as I said, presentation, some really good takeaways from that. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view a recording of today's presentation. So if you found this event useful, please share it with your colleagues. We've also included a link to the Digital Week webinar series in the resource list widget. Please be sure to click on the link to register for other events in the series. Once you leave this webinar, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We'd appreciate it if you would share your feedback on this event, as it helps us to provide you with the content most interesting for you. So with that, Chronis, I'll thank you for listening, and on behalf of Connect 365 Maritime, have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.